Today we'll be talking about Robert E. Howard's Red Shadows, which is the first of Robert E. Howard's stories to star Solomon Kane, the sword-wielding Puritan who hunted down evildoers, and this was published in 1928. So the story is divided into 5 chapters, but the first one is extremely short. It's basically just has Solomon Kane meeting a dying young woman in the forest who tells him who killed her, and then he says, "Men will die for this," and goes off to take revenge. We find out that the murderer is Lelou, a Frenchman, of course, the evil frogs. Did you have any notes on that?
Yeah, so there was the first bit of important characterization for Solomon Kane, where it says that he doesn't swear by God, by was it gods or something like makes no oath, but he just says it himself. So it's like that whole thing of let your yes be yes and your no be no. So he doesn't need to bind himself by anything to do it, because
Yes.
it's just when he resolves to do something, he's going to do it.
Yes. As someone who's read most of Robert E. Howard's stories, this is a trait pretty much all of his protagonists have, is they're all men of action.
Yeah.
And there's varying degrees to which some of them talk and some of them don't, but the overwhelming majority of them are the strong, silent type who take swift, decisive action without much deliberation.
Yeah, and very self-motivated.
Yes, and Solomon Kane is no different. Indeed, there's okay, it's not in here, but there's a quote later on which sums that up very well. And then the next chapter, again, that first chapter was basically only a page and a half, maybe 2 pages. But the second chapter has a time jump, which there are quite a few in this story.
And it's not immediately obvious that there is a time jump, is it? Like
no.
When you were reading that part to me, I thought that was just like cutting scene, like changing location.
Yes, so did I when I first read it. I was kind of confused, but we cut to Lelou.
This animal-themed band of criminals.
Yes, someone's like a leopard and someone's like a wolf and
someone's a rat.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he's discussing the problem of them being picked off predator style one by Solomon Kane.
Yeah.
With one of his compatriots, and they've set off most of them to go bully or torture some gold out of a hermit. And they're waiting for them to come back, and then eventually one man staggers back, dying.
Yeah, I found that quite funny in the story, because it was a very rapid repeat of the someone staggers in, mortally wounded, just briefly says how they dies and then how they were killed, and then dies really dramatically as soon as they've delivered all the plot relevant information.
Yes, it's very...
I thought that was very funny.
Yeah, well, the important thing to remember about the Robert E. Howard stories is that they are unbelievably tropey. But yet, in a lot of ways, these tropes were cutting edge at the time, and some of them were actually invented by Robert E. Howard himself. He pioneered a lot of these tropes.
And they're tropes because they work well, and they're very dramatic.
Yes.
Like it's that's what makes it fun in a story, and it makes it feel like you're in a adventure story when things like that happen.
Yes.
And also I wanted to say that it's something that, especially in this story where we do have a lot of time jumps, he sort of cuts out a lot of the plot to focus on a few dramatic scenes.
Yes.
It reminds me a bit of the story in older novels, like in Pride and Prejudice and books like that, is where when you're first introduced to the character, the author directly tells you what they're like.
Yes.
And these are their core characteristics, and then they are like displayed throughout the story.
Yeah.
Whereas I feel like lots of modern books, it seems like the author doesn't want to give that away. Like it sort
Yeah.
of wants to be a mystery of how the character is, what the character is actually like, and it's slowly revealed over time their characteristics, and then sometimes we never really get core characteristics for them, and it can be very inconsistent.
Yes.
So I think that's interesting because I think also when you lay out like this guy is this way, straight away you're then sort of tied yourself down to you have to follow through on that, don't you?
Yeah, and if they ever do something that's against that, the audience will really go, "Wait a second."
Yeah, that doesn't fit their like 3 sentence blurb that you wrote about them. What I'm really thinking about is in Pride and Prejudice, how it says Mrs. Bennet was of a woman of mean understanding, and I don't remember all of it, but it has like a whole paragraph describing her and exactly what she's like, and that's right at the beginning, and then that is displayed more and more throughout the story. So it's kind of similar to like the bit where it talks about how he doesn't swear by anything, and he just is like resolved to do it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, someone at the GPS conference said that the most vital thing for understanding a character is giving them a worldview and having them follow through with that worldview.
Yeah, and Solomon Kane definitely has a worldview. He's a bit different than Conan, because Conan has a lot more. His motivation is a lot more straightforward.
Yes.
And a lot more concrete. Like you know that
I have the quote here. Do you want me to read it?
Yeah.
Slowly he rose, mechanically wiping his hands upon his cloak. A dark scowl had settled on his sombre brow, yet he made no wild, reckless vow, swore no oath by saints or devils. Men shall die for this, he said coldly.
Yes, that's exactly Solomon Kane, and that one that tells you everything that you need to know about him.
Well, there's another story, probably maybe it's the longest story, I think. It's called something like Skulls in the Night, and it has a passage in there which, like several big, meaty chunks of prose which describe his character. I think that's probably the more fully encompassed understanding of his character, but this is still very succinct and good. And as we go into the second chapter, I think there's a really interesting parallel with Lulu or Leloup, however you pronounce it, and Solomon Kane, where they're both very similar in build and look and skill and chosen weapon. They're both rapier users. And yet their worldviews and ideals are so completely opposite, in that Lulu is so passionate and hedonistic and emotional.
And likes to talk a lot.
Whereas Solomon Kane is dour and fanatical and selfless and doesn't like to talk too much.
Yeah. Going back to like comparing how characters are treated in these older stories and more modern ones, I'm particularly thinking of Harry Potter. Like, is there like one, like a short passage in all those books that just maybe there is, and I'm just not remembering it. But is there like one that you could look at and think this 100% encapsulates what Harry is like?
No, definitely not. I mean, it's written from a different point of view, isn't it? Well, not really. I mean, they're both written from third person, but Harry Potter books definitely more directly from
his perspective.
Yes. Yeah, I don't know. But I think you're right. There's definitely. I think it's also because, for instance, with Harry Potter, there's if you were to have a line boiling down the essential characteristics of Snape right at the start, that would be a massive spoiler.
Yeah, and I suppose like especially like all the authority figures like Dumbledore as well.
Yes,
it's kind of kept their motivations are kept a lot more sort of shadowed and mystery.
Yes.
I suppose maybe McGonagall, you kind of get a pretty good sense of exactly what she's like very quickly.
Whereas in books like these, there's no twist to the characters.
No,
for any of them. They always
exactly.
act consistently, right from the start, right to the end, pretty much.
Yeah, and almost instantly you can go, oh, that's so them.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I feel like that's probably more like how people are. That you can get a very good grasp. Like, people tend to act in a pretty consistent way, usually.
There's also the interesting lines in here. Two things I want to mention. One, the way Solomon Kane is consistently referred to as being like Satan by the bandits.
Yeah.
So they give this very demonic imagery to this person who's hunting them, who sees himself as being extremely righteous and carrying out God's work. But also how it says, I don't know if it's in this chapter or not, but it says Solomon Kane thought of himself as a Puritan, though he was not wholly so.
He doesn't explain. Robert E. Howard doesn't explain what he means by that.
Well, again, he explains that in Skulls in the Night.
Yeah.
Later on, but that's like some subtle foreshadowing.
Should we explain what happens next?
Yeah. So the guy bursts in, dies like, he's coming.
I only just got here in front of him. I know.
And then
and there's also all their money is in this cave.
So,
it's like,
so there's this schemy, cowardly rat guy in there with Lulu, and there's one other person outside.
Do you remember what his animal totem is?
I don't.
He doesn't get one. He's not important enough. He was wearing a red shirt.
Yeah. The one thing I remember is that he didn't tigerishly do anything. I know that for sure.
No, he just sheepishly died.
Yes. And Lulu basically says, well, the three of us need to get away with all the money now. And the rat-like guy says, oh, that sounds like a great idea. And then Lulu tricks him and stabs him to death.
Yeah.
And then before he can finish off his last companion and make her get away with all their stuff, Solomon Kane, that there's the...
thunderclap, lightning flashes, and then Solomon Kane stands silhouetted in the doorway.
Yes, a shadow among shadows.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I just want to say that we know instantly that Lulu is going to be a main character, because when he's introduced, he was described as being as supple as a leopard. So we know as soon as we start introducing the
leopards and tigers and lions and stuff, we know this is important. Yeah.
Yeah, this is a main character. I thought the animal metaphors were not quite as just constant as in Conan, but they were still amusingly present. Yeah. He just loves them so much.
Thinking of the dichotomy between the two characters, kind of reminds me of the sort of national character stereotype in 80 Days Around the World.
Yeah.
Between, I've forgotten the characters' names now, but
Mr. Fogg.
Yeah, Mr. Fogg and who's his French servant? Passepartout. So it's the grim, humorless, precise Englishman.
Yeah.
As opposed to
who's like extremely driven and will do whatever he will carry out its purpose no matter what. Yes,
versus the more hedonistic, lively, fun-loving Frenchman. Although Passepartout is clearly a sympathetic, likable character, whereas even though Lulu is also kind of hard to dislike, he's also a murdering rapist brigand, so it's pretty.
Yeah.
You're definitely not meant to like him. And we also get an example. I think this is definitely more the case with Solomon Kane than with Conan. In this story, Solomon Kane gets outmatched in some way quite a few times.
Well, definitely Conan is like, I suppose he was captured once or twice.
Conan is outmatched or outwitted a few times, yes, but not nearly as much as Kane is.
Yeah, Kane is definitely a bit more
human.
Yeah, whereas Conan is definitely more like, he's just so amazing, just never taken aback by anything. He's just always the best.
It'll be impossible for Conan to be introduced as a character now without the accusations of Gary Sue flying thick and heavy.
Yeah, but I feel there was also I don't know if, from what I've heard, that sounds like that's more of a thing from protagonists, like adventure protagonists around this time.
Yeah.
They were more sort of like the amazing, the incredible. They have, you know,
Yes.
they're just the greatest.
Yeah.
And I suppose is that. Do you think that's more like the thing of people talking about anti-heroes and things, where the idea of people become obsessed with like there's flaws in my
Yeah.
hero and he's not the greatest at everything because
Yeah.
they've
It's more gritty and realistic.
Yeah, because quite a few for many years that was the main thing, that the heroes were always good, great guys who were very good at everything.
Yeah.
But it does make pretty exciting stories though.
Yes.
And I would have to say that Conan is also a lot more. I suppose I'll have to see further on in Solomon Kane's books, but Conan's definitely a lot more morally ambiguous.
He's more
makes...
Well, some people would say that Solomon Kane is more like morally dark than Conan, though.
Right. Well, I haven't seen anything.
I mean, I wouldn't agree with that, but some people would say this fanatical Punisher-like hunting down of the evildoers is very problematic.
Yeah.
But yeah, Conan is more like if he was a D&D character, it'd be more leaning toward neutral.
He's definitely very neutral, and he's very he's not sort of afraid of like making defenseless women very kind of scared and unsure about what he's going to do next.
Yeah, and he's more hedonistic and self-centered.
Yeah, and it's like, oh well, I suppose I will rescue the girl from the monster just because who's gonna be my girl? Who's gonna be my girlfriend of the day if she's not around? I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah. So Lulu overturns a table that the candles are on, plunging the room into darkness, and as we later discover,
after a dramatic conversation with Solomon,
where Solomon Kane reveals how he lured the other bandits into the hermit's house and
gunpowder treason and plot or whatever.
Yeah, set them all on fire.
Up. Yeah.
So in the darkness, Lulu presses the escape hatch and goes down to the secret tunnel.
Like General Grievous in the Clone Wars.
Yes.
Is this the bit as well where we have the phrenology bit?
Yes.
Where it like describes his Solomon Kane's features and says, oh, that means all these different personality traits.
He had the straight nose of the fanatic, yeah.
Yeah, and the forehead of the idealist.
That's right, yes.
Because that was very big at that time as well, wasn't it? And that's like another, as you said, Robert E. Howard did a lot of research for his books and was very into the latest scientific developments. So
yes, for instance, a lot of the stuff about the prehistory settings that Kull and Conan live in were based on the latest theories about the early formation of human civilization.
Yeah, who's Kull?
Kull is the previous character to Conan, who lives in the time before the Hyborian Age, where Conan's story takes place.
Okay.
So it's much more mythical and prehistorical.
Is he also a barbarian type guy?
Yes, he's very similar.
Right.
But Kull, he's less fun-loving than Conan. But yeah, we should definitely read Kull at some point as well. But anyway, onto chapter 3. We open with... Oh, yes.
Sorry, I just want to say my favourite bit when the Frenchman spots Kane dramatically standing in the doorway, and it says that he acts with elaborate unconcern.
Yes.
I also really like all the descriptions in this book. He doesn't go into like a huge amount of detail about all the like the landscapes and whatever we want, like all the general things, but you feel like what descriptions he does give, they really evoke a lot of imagery and make you think of, like, really describe, help you picture what everything
for sure.
is.
Robert E. Howard's really good at short, punchy, really evocative prose. He's really good at that.
Yeah, that makes me. I really want to write better and write like that.
So chapter 3 is the chant of the drums, and we open with Kane.
Smash cut to Africa.
Yes, he's pulling in to the coast near a village where he thinks Lulu has escaped to. And as we will later find out, years have passed
Yes.
since he started hunting Lulu, and it's like, wow, this short story takes place over this epic tale of years-long treks across the world of Solomon Kane right on this guy's ankles the entire time. And
Yeah. It could be like a 3-movie franchise, very long
yes,
TV show. It makes me think like in that writing course we did, they talked about the story structure, and there was all these chapters and then key chapters where the plot turns. And this short story seems very much like the you have this big story structure, and then he's just cut out everything except the key
Yeah.
chapters. There's like the inciting incident, and then after that he cuts out all the story except the bits where Solomon Kane is directly confronting the main villain.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because it doesn't really feel like it doesn't really feel like you're missing anything.
No.
It just feels like a very like condensed, very dramatic story.
Yeah.
And I think I said to you that people say cut to the chase, but he cut the chase.
Yes, he cut the chase out.
Yeah.
And this is when and as Kane begins to creep toward the Negro village, he first hears the drums, and throughout
Yes.
the rest of the story, the drums are constantly referenced as beating, and it says something or other said the drums said this, the drums said that, and that is clearly Solomon Kane interpreting these drums in some way.
Yes.
But there's also another possibility where perhaps, maybe not at every instance, but perhaps in every instance, the drums aren't actually beating at all.
What do you mean?
And that as Solomon Kane is entering this more primordial, more savage, unknown land, he's manifesting in his mind the sound of the drums as the call to his wild self inside. I probably would say that's probably not the case, but I've heard some people say that there's a possible interpretation.
Yeah, it seems like the voice of the jungle, like the voice of the
Yes.
as it likes to talk about like the far past.
And the drums represent both the like spirit of the past and the spirit of the wild and the spirit of Africa and of the black god, which is what the tribe is praying to.
Yeah, he's entering a new domain. A foreign territory, and it also just in general works to create a spooky atmosphere.
Yes.
That you're all a bit unsettled. You think,
Yes.
What's going on?
The atmosphere here is very spooky.
Yeah.
But as he's approaching, again we have a rare for Robert E. Howard, an element of our protagonist getting outmatched, where he
just sucker punched.
He just sucker punched, and come out of nowhere, someone gets a ×3 sneak attack on him and knocks him out.
Yes.
We later find out is Golka, who's like the biggest, strongest right-hand man to the king, muscle guy from the village.
I found this whole part of the plot a bit confusing because there were all the different names of all the people in the village, and it was I found it hard to keep track of who was who.
Yes, I found it confusing first time reading it through, but reading it through the second time with you, I was able to remember who everyone's names were and what they were all doing. He wakes up and he is spoken to by a juju man, a shaman, who is in a technically with both the Conan the Cull and the Solomon Kane stories, they are all in chronological order. They're a connected universe. There's almost no recurring characters. They're all very self-contained, which makes sense considering the
vast time difference.
Well, yes, but also the fact that they were all written for weird tales.
when that, what is Weird Tales? Was that a magazine?
Yeah, it's like a pulp magazine for fiction that people would
Yeah.
get. And
I suppose that also explains like the structure of the story where you're trying to get everyone hooked, so you don't have time to be like, this is our boat ride, and you know, I'm going to devote 5 chapters to me being to Solomon Kane on a boat, because you need to give people the good stuff, otherwise they're not going to buy the next magazine.
Exactly, yeah. I forgot what I was going to say.
So would each chapter be in a different magazine? Is that a different issue?
A different issue, I assume so, but I'm not sure.
You were talking about the witch doctor Juju guy.
Oh yeah. His name is Nilonga, and what I was going to say is that where he doesn't often do recurring characters, Nilonga is the only recurring character in the Solomon Kane.
Wow.
Like he shows up later on, and he has a very important role later on.
It's by popular demand.
Yeah, so it's interesting here. But
he's an escaped slave, which explains why he can speak English, so he can communicate to Solomon Kane.
Yes, and he has had his place of power in the village.
He was like the chief's right-hand man.
Yes, and he is now being kicked out, and the chief, King Songa, is now in cahoots with the vile Frenchman.
Yes.
Who is living here as well, and no longer kind of hints that they can work together against the common enemy, and then floats off, leaving Solomon Kane wondering, was that a dream?
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Yes.
And then he's dragged out to be sacrificed / executed in some kind of horrible way, and he has another dialogue tree with the Frenchman. And
it seems like the king / chief guy Songa of this village is letting the Frenchman get away with a lot of stuff. Like he drones on, and you think it must be very boring for the king and everyone else in the village. Like he's speaking a language that they don't understand, and he's just like having this really long conversation with their prisoner. And it's really dramatic, all the flourishes and everything. But I mean, I like all his dialogue. So and
we actually move into the 4th chapter here, because the 3rd chapter was just basically Kane arriving. So again, these chapters are very... Again, I don't know in what form they were originally put out, or whether it was separate issues or whatnot, but the chapters are very different in length. But yeah, so he has the conversation with Lelou, and...
Lelou kind of... Is it at this point that he sort of says, I wasn't really ever afraid of you, I just sort of ran away because I was bored?
Yes.
Which I don't really buy. Like, it seems very weird that he just ran away and now he's living like penniless in an African village somewhere. I think he's just putting up a front.
I actually think he's telling the truth when he says he's not afraid, because he said, I didn't run away from you because I was afraid. I just did it on some whim. Like, he doesn't quite understand it himself. So maybe it's not that he's afraid or not, but that he isn't consciously afraid of Solomon Kane, but Solomon Kane exudes some kind of supernatural menace, which, like, in some hidden recess of his mind, makes him feel like he has to keep running away from him, even though he can't explain it.
I suppose that's another connection between Lelou and Solomon Kane, is that both of them are motivated by, like, instincts in themselves that neither of them sort of fully examine or understand. Like, it talks about how Solomon Kane just resolves to pursue Lelou, and he doesn't really understand why he's doing it.
Yes.
And I suppose that can go into like the theme of the story, which is kind of repeating cycle, or sort of like the same story repeating throughout history.
Yes, and we get a foreshadow of that with Golka, the guy who knocked Solomon Kane out and captured him. He's killed a female gorilla, and that
is hanging up in the village. And
yes.
Everyone's very impressed with him.
Yeah, and this makes him a big deal.
Yeah. But what I was going to say is, it's like maybe Robert E. Howard is going to talk about, like, it's like the primeval forces in both men are what is driving them to behave in this way.
Yes.
So it's not so much they're not like individuals motivated by what's best for them. They're somehow like vessels for like this archetypal story which is being carried out.
Yeah, and that is definitely a theme which Robert Howard goes through over and over again with the primordial nature of man, instinct, barbarism, the wild versus civilization, and he definitely comes down on the side of barbarism and instinct being the purer, more noble, having a purity and nobility to it, which civilization and social mores and the conscious reasons people tell themselves for why they act the way they do, that's all a bit meh.
Well, yeah, but he's not very. He doesn't give a very flattering portrait of the African savages either, though, does he? He's
No.
not. He It's one of the bits that was like maybe slightly uncomfortable. Some of the descriptions.
Yes, but you have to bear through that with Robert E. Howard, and this is far from the worst.
Yeah, but I think
But yes,
I think you're right that he does have criticisms of civilization, but he has criticisms for barbarism as well. I think like both with Conan and with Solomon Kane, there seems to be his heroes combine both. That they are
yes,
the civilized man who's has rules and like nobility and things that come from civilization, but also is sort of in tune with the primal as well.
yeah,
Especially like that, I think that becomes more of a theme later on in Conan,
yeah,
where he like starts off more barbaric, but then as we get more towards the end of his story, when he actually becomes king, he is definitely more embracing the civilization
yes.
and
And he's actually a very principled anti-imperialist as well,
yeah,
and like in favor of like, having a light hand and not oppressing the populace.
yes.
So it's like there's all of these
yeah, Conan definitely becomes a
noble,
civilized
liberty-loving principles in Conan, which once he takes on leadership in civilization, he expresses, even though he seemed to be such a savage before.
Yeah. So Conan becomes civilized, whereas Solomon Kane definitely is civilized already.
Yes.
And maybe but it's like the story hints at that maybe he's not quite as civilized as he thinks he is.
Yes, there's definitely strong hinting on the ground that that's the case. But so, if I can get the order of events right here, Golka goes up after the conversation with the Frenchman. Golka goes up to Solomon Kane, looks at him, and they have a staring contest, and of course the white man wins it.
Yeah, he's like, for the first time, Golka was afraid.
Yes, and
yes.
so to like get some of his machismo back, he spears a helpless victim on the altar of the Black God, which is this big idol in the centre of the circle that they're in, which Solomon Kane's clearly going to be sacrificed to.
Well, and I imagine in the story, the Black God is just like a big like hunk of black rock that's been sort of roughly carved to resemble.
It's a bit, it's like a big hunk of black rock. There's like a vaguely human shape about it.
Yeah, and it's definitely. It seems that is very associated with the drumming.
Yes.
It seems like the drumming is like the voice of this black god. I think it sort of even might say that explicitly.
Well, sometimes it says that, and sometimes it says the drumming is like the jungle or the past or something.
Yeah, but the black god is the jungle in the past.
Yes.
But also we should mention that Solomon Kane has been tied to a stake and is they're putting kindling all around him, so he's about to have a good old fashioned burning at the stake.
Yes, and it's at this point around here that Nilonga shows up and is quickly spotted and tied up next to Solomon Kane.
Because Lulu was listening and knew all along.
Yeah, Lulu was like, ho, I knew it all along.
I'm just surprised that he managed to restrain himself and didn't burst into the hut to give a big monologue about it when he was overheard.
Yes.
That's the most unbelievable thing that happened in the whole story.
And then, as they're beginning to be set alight, Nilonga seems to die, and then he spirit possesses the corpse on the altar that Golka killed, and the corpse zombie shambles up, and there's lots of very descriptive prose about how horrifying and unnatural and creepy this whole thing is, and Songa tries to kill it with a spear, but it comes at him and life drains him, and this is so terrifying that the villagers immediately release Nilonga and Solomon Kane.
and Longer died, but then came, like, his spirit comes back to his body and
yes,
he's
then
alive
the
again.
spirit comes back out of the zombie and goes back into him, and immediately it's like, this guy is like a crazy powerful wizard.
Yeah, and it's like, what did he have to do to get this power? Who knows? But probably something real bad.
Yeah, something grim and horrible beyond the realms of man's imagination. Oh,
yes,
something like that.
Yes, and then Solomon Kane and Lou took to his heels throughout this whole thing.
Yes.
And Solomon Kane was like watching where he went, and he gets his rapier back and he starts charging after him.
Yes. And
we're about to have our epic confrontation.
Yes, and as Kane's chasing after Lou, he comes across him, and he's surprised that the sneaky Frenchman didn't try to ambush him.
Yeah, that's another thing, because it sort of alludes to this at various points in the story, but the sneaky Frenchman never tries to be sneakily French to Kane. Like, he never tries to ambush him. He never tries to...
He gets away from the start sneakily, though.
Yeah, but, I mean, he could have tried to kill him when the lights went out, but he didn't do that either. So there's sort of like that's another one of those, like, unexplained, primeval motivations. Like, he doesn't want to, he wants to confront him in a fair fight.
Yes. And they start to have their duel.
Oh, and they have that epic moment where Kane says, "Are you prepared to meet your god?"
Oh, yes. And he makes some kind of quip about that. And Solomon Kane says, "I should have been more clear. Are you prepared to meet your master, the devil?"
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is another cool thing. I like it when it brings that his fanatical religious
yes, for
roots
sure.
is always cool.
And then we have some very cool, punchy descriptions of the fight, with Lulu being savage and animalistic and daring and flourishing and emotional with his sword fighting, whereas Solomon Kane is precise and exact with his every movement. Kind of like, whenever I think of Solomon Kane's dueling style, I think of Count Dooku from Star Wars. Because whenever Count Dooku's dueling is described, as always very precise and elegant and not wasting a single movement, which is how his sword fighting is described here as well.
Yeah, and again, he doesn't like say, "Oh, he parried and then he thrust and then he blah blah blah." He just has a few passages where he describes it metaphorically and tells you what the fight was like. And I like that, because that can get kind of boring and confusing to read.
Yes.
Where you try and basically describe a movie scene.
Although, even though we've all agreed that in many ways he's not a very good writer, I think, is his name Robert Flanagan, the guy who wrote The Ranger's Apprentice?
That's what I've always thought about Robert Flanagan, is that usually I find action scenes somewhat boring in novels and kind of skip them. Yeah. But I always like to read his. I think
his battle scenes and his actions and his fighting scenes are always really fun.
Yeah.
Always really fun to read.
I especially the one that really stands out to me is the one in the I think it's in the 6th book where they have to take the castle.
Yes.
That's really good.
Really good.
A very great series of action scenes. And also the battle scene against the Mongol guys.
Mongols. The battle in Oakleaf Bear is against the not Mongols is probably one of arguably my favourite fantasy battle scene.
Yeah. It's those bits, and the relationship between the characters is definitely the bits that make me keep on reading The Ranger's Apprentice. Yeah. Yeah.
But to go back to the fight, again, in a very unlike Conan way, Lulu constantly seems to be getting the better of Kane throughout this fight. He's causing him to bleed from multiple cuts in all these directions.
Conan just utterly destroys anyone he fights. He's always just ripping people's heads off, smashing their arms. He just destroys people.
Yes. And there's this.
Kane's definitely much more like the force of will, although Conan has that bit too. But
yes, in the Conan stories, whenever Conan meets someone who's the best at this, or they're the best runner or the strongest or the best swordsman or whatever, he's always able to easily beat whoever it is who is the best at something.
Because they live in civilization, whereas he is the wild, and he has the wolfish, tigerish, lionish
exactly.
strength and agility to outdo them.
Of his corded sinews and his...
Yes.
such and such.
Yes.
But yeah, Kane seems to be getting the worst of this. He's bleeding from all these minor wounds all over the place. But yet,
Totally undeterred.
Outwardly, he seems not to be flagging at all, or caring about his wounds at all. Whereas Lou is getting more tired and more desperate by the moment.
It was very much like a "I can do this all day" Captain America moment, wasn't it? Like
for sure.
The human spirit and yeah.
Yeah, and then so Lou's getting desperate, so he tries one last desperate attack, which nearly succeeds, and it actually does get Kane in his shoulder. But Kane, it's even described what move he uses to finish him off, but he disarms him.
Yeah.
He disarms Lou, the sword goes flying, and then it's like his rapier flashes in the moonlight.
I assume what I thought it was that like he did a straight like thrust through his heart. That's sort of what I imagined. It was like a ribbon of silver or something. So
yes,
that's sort of how I imagined.
I imagined a thrust through the heart.
But it evoked very much like it's sort of an anime death moment where like everything goes black and white and you just see like the bluey
slash through the black screen. Yes.
Oh, yeah, and then the blood sprays everywhere. It was very cool.
Yes, that was exactly the image in my head too.
And then Kane feels kind of bummed out. He's just like, oh, it wasn't all worth it.
But what you see it again is that if Conan was suffering from these wounds, it would be like, these wounds would have fatigued a lesser man, but Conan had such animal vitality that he didn't care too much.
Yeah.
Whereas
because Conan like did a whole fight where he had like a totally mangled leg with like the like his leg was just horrifically broken and he was just perfectly cool with it the whole time.
Yes. Whereas that the idea in the fight is that Solomon Kane was legitimately suffering.
Yes.
The effects that a normal man would suffer from all these wounds throughout the fight, but he just gritted his teeth and worked through it the whole time. And now that it's over, he feels totally weak and woozy, and he makes a mistake.
Yes, he goes to try and wash himself up and leaves his rapier
on the side. Yes, and then Golka, the person with big red lips and a flat nose. And
yes,
all these
the racist stereotype appears.
Yes,
who is
the microaggression given form in a short story appears.
Yes,
yes.
And he was the gorilla killer.
Yes.
And he's the one who knocked out Kane before.
Yes.
And it's also not really explained why it's just like he's just kind of it doesn't really explain why he wants to kill Kane, but you just sort of feel like he's just like, oh, I've got nothing else to do.
Yeah. It seems like Lulu, he probably wasn't welcome in the village anymore or something, but it's not exactly clear.
Yeah, I think he probably thought that the witch doctor was going to kill him, which seems pretty likely.
And so they both realise that the rapier is too far away for Solomon Kane to get to it, so he just like casually walks forward, like, I'm just going to take my time to kill you. And suddenly, something even more bestial and horrid than himself appears. A gorilla. The mate of the female gorilla that he killed has come all the way from its homeland of the north to get revenge. And I get the feeling that Robert E. Howard might not have had enough information about gorillas as maybe should have.
It doesn't seem like a very accurate description of a gorilla, does it?
Because it's walking on its hind legs with its arms nearly touching the ground.
Yeah.
Whereas I know gorillas can do that, but I'm pretty sure
it would be loping along on its front
they're
legs.
practically on all fours practically all the time, so it's a bit weird.
And just sort of the shape, he didn't give a very precise description of it, but just like the general shape and words that he used, just sounded like a very big, hairy man.
Yes.
Whereas the gorilla was sort of quite a different shape from a person.
Yes.
So.
But yes, so the.
But he didn't give enough wrong descriptions of it to make
to totally ruin it. No.
Yeah.
And so it disarms Golka of his spear, like breaks all his bones almost immediately, and then once he's dead, throws him up and skewers him on a branch up in a tree.
Like reminiscent of how the female gorilla is hung up in the village.
Payback.
And this is he basically explicitly says this, but I was thinking it before it was explained, which was that it's a parallel story to the story of Solomon Kane and Lulu, where the justice is done, and there's the revenge for innocent life. The pursuing vengeance,
catching up, unexpectedly.
Which means that from what the story is saying, Solomon Kane is the more primal ancient force that is coming down to pursue and avenge Lulu, who's similar to him but a bit more civilized.
Yeah, but then there's a weird dichotomy there because Lulu is also more passionate and emotional, whereas Kane is more controlled and self-disciplined.
Yeah.
And
definitely, Kane on the whole seems more as compared to Conan. Conan definitely seems like more of a superhuman character, whereas Kane sort of seems like a character that is someone an ordinary man who chose to be superhuman through determination and force of will. Yes. I think that's why he reminded me a lot of Batman when you were reading the story.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. And the story ends with the drums of the Black God pounding in Kane's head. And several times there's been something mentioned about how it's undiscriminating about what kind of blood sacrifice and killing it needs.
It doesn't care who's in charge.
Yeah, or just cares is that the primal slaughter continues. So the idea is that there's this sort of higher value of justice which has been served here, but yet the Black God doesn't care. It sees itself being fulfilled in this slaughter that's happening, which is it reminded me of the in Warhammer 40,000 the Chaos God of War. That there's like a famous tagline in Warhammer 40,000. It's just Khorne cares not from whence the blood flows.
Yeah.
So it's like this primal bloodthirsty force, which I think again that ties in somewhat with Howard seeing a not totally immoral aspect to this like primal force, because this dark force doesn't care that it's being fed with the blood of unjust people getting their comeuppance. Whereas I would say that actually these ancient demonic forces do actually...
They want it to be innocent.
Yes. Yeah. So I do think on a personal level I'd probably have some moral disagreements with Robert E. Howard about about these ancient supernatural demonic forces, about how truly like yin-yang, good and evil, sort of like primal neutral they are. I'd probably...
Yeah, well, he was an atheist though. Yes. But I liked the bit when Kane sees the zombies' possession, and Kane just sees it as a devil's work, and he's like not even that like freaked out. He's just like, oh yeah, that's the devil, and then moves on. Which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
But he maybe Solomon Kane is like more aligned with like the primal forces because of like he's like dedicating himself to a higher cause and sort of aligning himself, and sort of he's kind of like I suppose people would say like, you know, he's choosing to become like an Ubermensch, and sort of that is like causing him to sort of become like an archetype in this story in ancient times.
Which is a lot of what Julius Evola would talk about in regards to these ancient traditions which we need to go back to, which call on you to be self-sacrificing and totally committing yourself to an ideal which you try and follow through in every aspect of how you live. That's definitely...
Who's Julius Evola?
He was a Sicilian aristocrat who wrote a lot of like right-wing traditionalist stuff, and he wrote a book called Revolt Against the Modern World. It's like all this petty, materialistic, blah 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 blah. You know, like raw, be an Ubermensch. Oh,
Well, I the way you describe it, I think I agree with that.
Yes, I agree with them on that too. So yeah, so the story ends with the drums beating Solomon Kane's head, and they say, "You will never forget us. You will never forget the sound of ever, ever, ever."
It's very spooky, like ghost story stuff. Like he would always be haunted to this dying day of the girl's face.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think this was good. I think we've talked about. We got quite a lot of conversation out of a pretty short story.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the next one.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Bye, everyone.